Society Matters.
Welcome back to Raised by Survivors. I'm your co-host, Bernie Furshpan, with Alan Mindel here on hmTv at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. We were talking about our parents being survivors, what they went through. I'd like to delve into what it was like being raised by survivors. By the way, I'm drinking a can of seltzer.
The drink of choice.
Because my dad used to get bottles of seltzers delivered every week in these, big cases. And this brings me right back to that.
Do you remember the guns where they'd have it? It was like a permanent glass. It wasn't disposable.
Yes.
And it had the screw top on it.
Yes.
And it was a trigger.
And he used to screw in a little
gasket for it.
And he loved the seltzer.
They all did.
Why? What
I have no idea what it was. I just
it
don't
was
think...
different than club soda. It's got a little salt in it, I think.
Yeah, the club soda had the salt.
Does club soda have the salt? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what's different about it, but they wanted their seltzer.
All the time.
They would kill for seltzer.
Yeah. And the best version of it. The bigger the bubbles, the better. You
grew up in Long Island.
Yeah.
In Great Neck.
Yeah.
And do you remember your childhood?
I mean,
how far back can you remember, and what was it like?
I remember it pretty far back because I had a pretty unique childhood. I mean, I have a great brother and sister who are really the typical age for a 2G, and they are 16 and 18 years older than me, respectively.
Really?
My parents had their kids, raised their kids, and then they went on a cruise in the Mediterranean. And when the boat left Italy, it shifted left instead of right. And the next thing you know, here comes me. And when my mother's gynecologist told her that she was pregnant, she just laughed. Yeah. She thought he was kidding because she's in her 40s. And this is like 1970, 71. And the guy tells her she's pregnant. She didn't believe it. She came home and told my brother and sister, and my sister thought she was playing a joke on him because, they would be brutal with them with that stuff, until they saw her showing, they didn't believe it, So I'm a little bit in that way different, but
how did your father react?
I think they considered it a blessing. Mm-hmm. I never ventured to ask too far with it, right. Yeah. But it definitely, made me get a kind of perspective that was different from other 2Gs because, when the first generation survivors had so many of their kids, they were a little younger and they were able to kind of put up a facade a little longer. Mm-hmm. And just like here at the center, people started to come forward and tell stories. That wasn't an early thing that happened. It took a long time for survivors to tell their story. And for my parents, for my brother and sister, they didn't tell them too much at all. But as I was older and they were hanging out with their friends, and you and I have mentioned this before, a Holocaust survivor, they had lots of friends, but the real friends they had were all survivors.
Right, they can totally relate to them. They did things together. They had parties together. They would celebrate New Year's Eve together. They would go up to the Catskills in the summer with them.
Because they could relate to them in a way that they just couldn't relate to other people.
Exactly. And they had a shared experience that was pretty traumatic. And, when you tell, I'm sure when they talk to other people about their experiences, they probably weren't. They couldn't. And
they wouldn't.
The other people probably didn't understand.
Didn't understand anything.
You can tell a story, but if you experience it, it's a completely different thing, and they can relate to each other. It resonated with their friends.
Every story I know, or most of them that I know about my parents, and so many stories that I know about so many other survivors, were stories I heard sitting in a car filled with survivors, because somehow before the SUV they still filled out more survivors in a Cadillac than you can put in a Chevy Suburban today. But they would tell so many stories to each other because it would just crack out. They had no one else to share it to, and then it had to come out. So it would come out to other survivors. That's who they could talk to and tell it to. So that's how you would hear about these things.
Right.
But I mean, I remember myself, I'm in, elementary school, kindergarten, and, my parents were just not like any of these other parents, The other parents were cool and chill, and they were very relaxed about the world, and they had their perspective of it, and they had no clue of the way it was in our house. And like you, if you ask any 2G, we would not trade our childhood.
Not the least bit.
For anything.
No, I loved my childhood.
And we wouldn't trade our parents and the love they gave us. Anyone.
What's the
but
one
it was
word?
Different.
What's the one word that comes to your mind about how you were raised? What's the one word?
With more love than anyone else ever had.
There you go. Because that was asked to me. I was asked that question during the documentary.
Right.
What's that one word? And the one word was loved.
Yeah.
They loved me and my brother and made sure we were going to make it in life.
You better make it.
Right?
It didn't matter.
There was some kind of pressure there, but
some kind of pressure.
To me, it wasn't that overt, but it was obvious that they wanted us to succeed. They really didn't care so much about what we were going to do, but they wanted us to be good husbands. They wanted us to be good parents and to be successful no matter what we did.
Whatever it was, the only way to do it was to do it right.
Right.
There was no other way.
So I wanted to be a pilot in the worst way. I loved planes. I would watch planes. I would beg my dad to bring me to JFK near a runway, somewhere on a highway, just to watch the planes go up and come down. And I used to love it. And I used to dream about becoming a pilot. But my mother said to me, you can't go to aviation high school. What kind of a husband are you going to be? What kind of a father are you going to be? You'll be flying around and your family's going to be home missing you. So she threw that value into me, and she drove it home, and I understood what she meant, and I can't wrong her for that. And so I became a doctor, and it's not that she pushed me to do that, but I understood what she was saying at that time. I really got it.
My parents, my father spent some time going to NYU engineering school at night, but he was working full-time, running a very successful company, raising little kids. And he did most of it, but never got around to finishing it through. And so, a lot of my cousins have had some exceptional academic careers. I don't know if I was ever going to be one of those people. I never was, But I had cousins that, one helped invent math, doctors galore from Harvard and other places. I mean, just tremendous academic accomplishments. For my father, it was his dream that I become a lawyer. He didn't care if I practiced. He wanted me to achieve that level of education, And so, he died when I was 21 years old. And, we had a tough run after he had passed. But I made sure as soon as the opportunity came, that's why I went to law school. It wasn't my dream to be, doing it. I wanted to fulfill that dream. And to this day, how our family runs as a unit, runs the way he wanted it to run. And it wouldn't be the way anyone else would do it the way we do it. Right. No one's like us.
Did you ever see your parents cry? Let me tell you about this one thought that I have about my father crying. But think about if you ever saw your parents cry. And I was once asked, did you ever see your father cry? And I said, my father wanted me and my brother to man it up whenever there was some adversity, some challenge of some sort.
Right.
But I did see my father cry. And when did I see him cry? When my brother and I graduated high school. And then I thought about it later. The reason he cried was because it was all worth it. The hell he went through to survive those 3 years in the forest was all worth it to see his sons graduate high school. Then he cried when we graduated college and postgraduate, and when we got our doctor's degree, and then when we had children. And then when my mother died, he cried every day for 5 years until he passed away.
They couldn't live without each other.
They couldn't, no.
It was not conceivable.
Did you ever see your parents crying?
Yeah, I mean, for my dad, it wasn't particularly often, but there were a couple of times. It wasn't about just his kids. My mother had these sisters. My father didn't. He lost his siblings, in the Holocaust. He lost his mother. Mm-hmm. He eventually was, to his surprise, reunited with his father, but he didn't have any siblings and so much of his extended family was murdered. My mother had some sisters and brothers, so there were a bunch of them that had kids at the same time, and they raised them all together, with a bond that to this day is unbreakable. Survivors, families, they might want to kill each other 1 minute, but they're never going to break it off. Mm-hmm. But he had a very challenging health situation that took his life eventually. But he was diagnosed with lymphoma, was supposed to die in 3 months, lived another 5 years. But a year before he died, I had this cousin that was, a very fun, entertaining, beautiful soul of a human, but troubled from time to time. Mm-hmm. And she was in a very bad marriage. And one day she was having a fight with her husband. And she said, if you do this, I'm going to climb the top of this apartment building and jump off the roof. And she did. She killed herself. And there's my father, fighting for his life. And he hears the news. And it broke him. He couldn't process it. And I'm standing there with him because at that point he was too sick to go out. And he's just walking back and forth and he's saying, how could she do it when life is so precious? Right. How could she do it? And he just couldn't
wrap his head around it.
Wow. This is the toughest guy in the world. But he just could not come to terms with it, no matter what.
Right. There's a breaking point for everybody, even if you're tough. Right.
Right. He just couldn't.
That was his breaking point.
That was it. For my mom, I mean, losing him, she just had no cure for it. The level of pain that she felt. And, the thing that I won't forget, because, the whole family's in the hospital room, no hospice. We're in North Shore Hospital. And, it was not that shocking as to what was going to happen. And yet we were all shocked because here's this guy that was literally an invincible guy in every step beforehand. I mean, the guy would do 200 push-ups and sit-ups in a day. There wasn't a man alive that could take him. And, he eventually passed. And I'll never forget her crying over him as he had passed and how she felt cheated, that they had worked so hard to create this life in America. And they never had that opportunity to enjoy it.
I'm so sorry to hear this.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Both my parents, my mother died of complications from diabetes at age 74. My father at 84 from glioblastoma. Wow. But I think he died of a broken heart, you see, because my mother raised my dad, actually.
Yeah.
She had 2 twin boys and my father, so she raised 3 boys. And the reason she took on this maternal role was because my father, he witnessed part of it. He was 1 out of 8.
Wow.
And they were all killed, including his 4-year-old brother.
Yeah.
His sister that he adored, his mother who he loved so much. So she took on this maternal role, my mother, and raised him and fed him comfort food, which was Polish food. And what people think is Jewish food is actually Polish food, like bagels, dill pickles, chopped liver, stuffed cabbage, kishka, even challah bread.
Man, do I love kishka.
So do I.
My wife won't let me touch it.
Oh my God, I love that stuff.
Yeah.
But there's some things that I just couldn't take. I was raised, in Brooklyn as a teenager in an Italian neighborhood, and I wanted to eat what the rest of the kids were eating. But my mother fed me kishka.
Right.
And I opened up the refrigerator door, and there's this thing called picha. It's made out of calf hooves, boiled with eggs and garlic. It smells like a dead body. So I tell my mom, I said, Mom, why can't you make us spaghetti and meatballs like the Russos next door?
Right.
So I used to sneak out every day and eat at Mrs. Russo's. And one of the lessons of the Holocaust is to be grateful for what you have, because, it could be taken away like that. So Mrs. Russo used to feed me what she called the best gravy in town.
Right.
It was a great spaghetti sauce. And so I was respectful to her. I said, thank you, Mrs. Russo. I would wash the dish. Her kids didn't finish, right? They ran out, played stickball, never said, thanks, Mom. Here, she loves me. She makes me eggplant parmesan, chicken parmesan. And my mother gets wind of the fact that I'm not eating her Polish food, right? So she runs out in a panic and buys something called shake and bake. And so I was raised on shake and bake. But you know what? It was American food. I remember my brother and I, we dealt with it, and it was fine. But that's what it was like growing up with people who brought their old recipes, right? The old world recipes. They didn't have TikTok or Instagram to learn about other recipes. What did you eat?
I mean, first thing is that my mom would have killed you. She just would have flat out killed you. It wouldn't even have been a conversation.
My mom didn't know.
Yeah, you wouldn't know which way it coming.
She thought I
You'd think Mike Tyson was coming after you. You wouldn't have had a shot in hell, But their number one thing, first and foremost, was, they knew how precious food was. Yeah. When you're living on a bunk on one piece of the loaf, and you're down to no weight, you could blow in the wind. Food isn't looked at as just a luxury, and you cannot bear it. If I didn't finish that plate of food, hell will be there to pay.
Wow. My mother was not like that.
Yeah.
But she did stand over me to make sure I finished it, and couldn't wait to take the plate so she can wash it.
Yeah. So she liked to make gefilte fish, which I hated my entire life until I got a little older.
Did your mom put like a little carrot on top?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Every time.
With that jelly?
God, I wouldn't touch that jelly. I hated it. The horseradish was fantastic.
Yes.
She made a great matzo ball soup. Mm-hmm. She tried to make her American dishes, with it. She always had her different versions of it through. But she made latkes. We had pierogies that were very good. Mm-hmm. We had a kreplach. She made once or twice. She used to make that more for my brother and sister. She said it's a pain in the neck, so I was going to have to adjust, without some of these things. My sister would say, Mom, why don't you bake? And I'm like, why don't you bake anymore? I've never seen her bake once. And she's like, oh, I should bake every week. And I didn't remember her ever baking, really. And she's like, it's too much work now. I'm not going to go do it. But I mean, there was a different sense of it for it through, and a tradition to it. And whenever we'd go to other cousins' houses, I had an unbelievable Aunt Betty and Uncle Muniak, who they're a great story. Muniak, yeah.
It sounds almost like a maniac, but I never heard that name before.
He had that, he had that reputation from time to time, but it wasn't true. He was one of the funniest guys, one of the best sense of humors of any, and they're the most loving couple I ever knew, because they used to do is they were in the garment district making buttonholes. Mm-hmm. And so they would wake up in the morning, they would drive together, would work together. So they would drive from Bayside, Queens, to Columbus Circle. They'd spend 12, 14 hours, making buttonholes, and then they'd get back in the car and drive back home. And they would do this, 6 days a week, right? And then Shabbos, we'd come over, or they'd come to us, or however the way it would be. I mean, my wife and I have talked about it. We said, I take a couple days to go for work to another state. And she goes, thank God, Alan, the absence makes the heart grow fonder. I said, could you imagine if we were Betty and Mel and we were sitting there going to the garment district? She'd go, I'd kill you. I wouldn't make it for a second.
First of all, I didn't know that they were, specialists in buttonhole making.
Oh, they know like Oscar de la Renta, every designer you ever heard of, they were friends with. They were.
You've mentioned that he had a good sense of humor. A lot of Holocaust survivors had great sense of humor, and many of them started this comedy career in the Yiddish theater as greenhorns, complaining about what life was like here in the States. Yeah. And this ended up in the Catskills, and before you know, we have this new career, this new industry.
Explain to people what the greeners were, because people don't get what a greener is.
Well, they were green. They were new. They weren't
They were
Americans.
green behind the ears. They didn't know when survivors came to America. People felt for them. They felt for the pain for them, but the Jews in New York were educated. Cultured, all these things. My mom, we didn't have running plumbing in the house, for them when they were growing up. They didn't have the education that they had here. They weren't raised with those particular skill sets. So, and they were rougher and tougher, They were blue collar,
yes.
My mom and dad, one of their first dates they went to was to see wrestling, It wasn't the ballet.
We also went to see wrestling at Madison Square Garden. You remember Bruno Sammartino?
My dad loved him.
My dad too.
How
about the Giant? What was his name?
Andre the Giant.
Andre the Giant.
Yeah, all this stuff.
And that Native American that put everybody to sleep?
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but he was big.
Right? He was big.
He was big.
And he had something called a move called the sleeper.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was fun times.
I mean, but the point is it was a totally different, the survivor somewhere, it's different from where you're from, but if you came from Poland and Eastern Europe and those places, America, when my mom moved into Astoria, Queens, to the Princess Martha apartment building, the fact that they had a building with inside plumbing and an elevator, she thought she had hit it like no one else, in this rent-stabilized apartment. They thought that they were like unbelievable where they had reached to that point.
It's quite a stark contrast to what life was like for them before.
But greeners were different.
They were different. They're very grateful, appreciative, and very successful in business because
there is no such thing as fail. I mean, my father said, the things that we would complain about, you think this is hard?
Oh, exactly.
This is not hard.
Exactly. As a teenager, I come out of the bathroom. My father would look at the toilet paper, the roll of toilet paper. Half of it is gone. He says, "What is wrong with you?" He appreciated every square because he lived without toilet paper for 3 years in the forest.
Yeah. They couldn't understand how you couldn't, there would be anything that you would say you wanted based on what you had.
Right.
It just didn't add up. And they'd want to provide it, but they're like, what are you even talking about? How could that be the issue with where you're at? But anyway, Betty was a phenomenal cook. She had all these recipes, but it was the original all-you-can-eat buffet at her house, because no matter what you ate, she would just keep putting stuff down. And they would tell her, you got to stop. She would not stop. She just kept going, till it was endless of it. Their story was, Muniek was in the Polish army too, and he's in the bunker. And they say in the bunker, we're going to take the next bunker because his commander, he hadn't heard of the Blitzkrieg yet, and he thinks they're going to win. He thinks the Polish army is the bomb. They've been training for months, and they're going to take it. So he gives the order, and there's 500 of them in the bunker, and they run to take the next bunker. And by the time they take it, they win it, they take the next bunker. By the time they take the next bunker, there's 8 of them left out of the 500. Wow. So the commander turns and says, okay, we're going to go take the next bunker. And my uncle goes to the commander. He goes, we're not taking the next bunker. He goes, well, what should we do? My uncle goes, it's over. We're going to go home. And he goes, what do you mean? My uncle goes, there were 500 of us. Now there's 8 of us. That's not a fight.
No, it's not a fight.
It's done.
Yep.
So my uncle comes back to my mother's neighborhood, and he says, the war's over. And the village elders, they go, did you desert? What'd you do? He goes, no, the war's over. And they didn't believe him. He goes, I'm trying to let you know the game is done. It's all over. You've got two choices. Germany's coming from one direction, Russia's coming from the next. Take your pick. I'm picking Russia. And he goes, I will take one of your kids with me. I can take one person with me. And Betty went with him. They hardly knew each other. They spent 6 years in Siberia, and the next thing you know, they're husband and wife. Wow. And they're the most loving couple I ever knew in my life with them.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Alan,
there's a lot of time with them.
This was fun, talking about our parents, and I miss them terribly. I'm sure you miss yours just as much as I miss mine. And would you like to talk about this a little further?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll come back for another episode to discuss what it was like being raised by survivors here on hmTV. I'm Bernie Furshpan with Alan Mindel. Stay tuned for more.